Welcome into a new edition of BVM Sports Chalk Talk. I'm Mike Cianciolo, joined as always by Scott Procter and Matt Morris. We're going to hit the hardwood today as the NBA's official team media days happened earlier this week, and there's no team to have a closer eye on right now than the Philadelphia 76ers in the Eastern Conference and what they're going to do with three-time All-Star Ben Simmons. Philly clearly wants him to stay there and be a Sixer for at least this season, but Ben Simmons, on the other hand, doesn't seem like he wants to stay. And right now, based how he played in the playoffs, and even though he is a three-time All-Star, was a potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate, how much trade value does he actually have, and what could the Sixers reasonably get in a package for Ben Simmons?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, Mike. First off, I completely believe the reporting that Ben Simmons plans to never play another game for the Philadelphia 76ers, especially when he's seen other stars take similar routes. James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, Anthony Davis, and Jimmy Butler each wanted out of their previous respective franchises and were granted their wish. It's especially important to keep in mind that, like Anthony Davis, Ben is represented by Rich Paul and Clutch Sports, who are damn near experts at this point, at this process. So for me, the destination for Ben Simmons is in Minnesota. This became even more clear to me when the Timberwolves over the weekend fired their president of basketball operations. I'm thinking Rosas, who was just fired, maybe wasn't trying hard enough to facilitate a deal for Ben Simmons, or maybe even gave up on it altogether. And of course, the reporting in the days since is that new team president Sachin Gupta is going to work his butt off to acquire Ben Simmons. Ideally, this works out as a Simmons and D'Angelo Russell swap, because I don't see Philly getting a better player in return than D'Angelo Russell at this point. But D'Angelo Russell and Karl Anthony Towns' friendship, real life friendship, might prevent Minnesota from pulling that off, especially since Cat seemed, taken aback by the fact that Rosas was even fired in the first place, tweeting some cryptic things. So, if that doesn't work out, I can see the T-Wolves sending over Malik Beasley, Jaden McDaniels, maybe in Josh Okogie and a few first-round picks in exchange for Ben. And if that's the case, maybe Houston, the Rockets maybe get involved as a third team as they're trying to obviously, get rid of John Wall and, his exorbitant contract. So I can see John Wall in Philadelphia, Ben Simmons in Minnesota, and Houston continuing its rebuild with more cap flexibility. That just appears realistic to me. But I do believe Ben Simmons is finished in Philadelphia, and I expect his next stop to be in Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree that he's done in Philadelphia. My only thing is, what are they going to be able to get for him? I mean, just let's go back to last year around this time. Ben Simmons was the focal point in a trade that was going to land the Philadelphia 76ers, James Harden. And it all kind of fell apart because Philly wasn't ready to get rid of Tyrese Maxey, and understandably so. He's a great young player and all of that.
And Matt, I want to cut you off here because I feel like the general consensus on Ben Simmons at this point is he's, being a baby. He's being a bit sensitive. But to your point, since the middle of last season, he is known that his name has been in trade talks for albeit better players. And, obviously his performance in the postseason wasn't ideal, but Joel Embiid and Doc Rivers' comments about him, following that Eastern Conference semifinal series, certainly you can understand why Ben Simmons don't want to play with them anymore.
I can understand that, but I think the other point you have to look at is the 76ers have been a team that I think all of us can agree have been a fringe NBA, for sure, an Eastern Conference contender and a fringe NBA contender over the last few seasons.
Yes.
They were a Kawhi Leonard shot away from making it to the next round, making it to the Eastern Conference Finals that year. They were embarrassed in the bubble, and Embiid seemed to wake up, take it to a whole nother level. Obviously, was a clear MVP candidate, your MVP candidate. I think the issue is that as true as all of those points are, and I can see why Simmons might be mad, it doesn't seem like Simmons has really overall improved. He's kind of just hung on his laurels and just used his God-given talent to kind of, I wouldn't say coast because he's an NBA All-Star, but he hasn't shown improvement in getting to that next level. And I think Doc and Embiid want him to get to that next level. And so there's this issue there. And as far as my point of going to that trade, they're not going to get James Harden. Like they can't get anything like that. To your point, D'Angelo Russell is probably the best they're going to get, a fringe all-star or a solid role player, and then maybe somebody worked in there to work out the cap space. I like the T-Wolves. I like Houston. I was also thinking that, he could land the biggest blockbuster maybe is the Portland Trailblazers, where I think they're trying to make some sort of move to please Damian Lillard and just shake things up to really go after a Western Conference title and maybe even make it to the NBA Finals. Do you get CJ McCollum out of that? I don't know, but I think Simmons could work well with Damian Lillard. I think the issue is that what is Philadelphia going to be willing to ask for or what they want, and what are teams actually going to be willing to give up for Simmons? And the only thing that I could see where something huge happens is if the Timberwolves get overly excited and too aggressive when there's really no other suitors and they outbid themselves almost.
Yeah, I'm not too keen on the idea of a Portland Trailblazers deal centered around CJ McCollum, simply for the fact that I don't think that's enough for Daryl Morey, even at this point, even with Ben Simmons' trade value, significantly diminished. You got to expect that Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, Doc Rivers, and again, Daryl Morey expect to be in the same conversation that they were last year as a legitimate Eastern Conference final contender, a potential, wild card to make it all the way to the NBA Finals. And adding CJ McCollum and removing Ben Simmons from this roster doesn't get you there. Nobody's going to look at you that way, as good as CJ McCollum is. My thing, I kind of just want to double back on this. Ben Simmons is a legitimate defensive player of the year candidate every single year. He was obviously my pick last year. I thought he was snubbed. Rudy Gobert obviously won it. But this is somebody who is going to be in the defensive player of the year conversation every single year. And I feel like people are looking at him sideways, and probably rightfully so, especially with the moments he had in that Atlanta Hawks series. But I'm looking at the past defensive player of the year winners. How often do we expect or look at Rudy Gobert to be a 20-plus point per game scorer? How about Draymond Green? We know what Draymond Green is. And I'd argue that, he's a lesser, depending on what year or time during his career you want to look at, a lesser version even of Ben Simmons. Joakim Noah won a defensive player of the year this decade. So did Marc Gasol, Tyson Chandler this decade. And we don't look at those guys as you need to give us more offensively. So I do believe that a lot of the criticism that's been thrown towards Ben Simmons' way is unfair. But Scott, okay, to your point then, was Joakim Noah ever the number 2 option on a NBA contending team? Was even Rudy Gobert? Is even Rudy Gobert the number 2 option on that Utah Jazz team? Well, I don't know what relevance that question has.
The relevance to that question is that if you're
for this reason, because that I've been on record saying that Ben Simmons was never, at least this past season, he was never their second option offensively. That was Tobias Harris. But go ahead.
Say, as currently constructed, would you even consider Ben Simmons the second offensive weapon on that team? Because you got Embiid, you've got Harris. You've got,
and Matt knows I've said that.
But my argument is that that's what you're packaged as. That's what Simmons demands of himself. He wants the ball all the time. He wants the offense to run through him. That's why they've had issues in the past.
So does Draymond Green to a certain extent.
Listen, but Draymond Green plays great with Steph Curry. Draymond Green is not getting in the way of Steph Curry and what he's able to do. In this season in particular, it seemed like you were either choosing either or. It was either Embiid was going to have a great night and Simmons was going to just be an afterthought, or Simmons, when Embiid was hurt, would drop 40 on the Utah Jazz. Like that's the point here, is that Simmons, up until this season, was considered the number 2 option and a key contributor, and like almost at level with Joel Embiid as far as who's leading this team and what's going to overpower the Sixers to an NBA Finals. And so for that to just drastically change, that's fine. And we can all agree on that. But Simmons doesn't think that way. And that's the biggest issue. If Simmons was actually willing to take more of a step back, be a Draymond Green, maybe go for like he could be a triple-double guy. I could see him 10, 10, and 10. But I don't think he thinks that of himself. But he's not willing to add anything to his game to really allow him to work well within that offense.
See, I kind of disagree with that in terms of what Ben Simmons thinks of himself offensively, because that possession in that Atlanta Hawks series where he's at the rim for a dunk and decides to pass the ball to Matisse Thybulle, I think he knows what he is offensively, and I think he knows what he is as a basketball player as a whole. I believe he's looking at other people like, y'all are holding me to a standard that you wouldn't hold other defensive player of the year type players to, where you want him to be a top 2 or 3 defender in the league and still give you 25 plus points per game. And I get it. Really, the biggest issue is his shooting, his lack of ability and, his want to actually do it. And I get that part of it. You can't really be a legitimate threat, especially in the postseason, if that's what your MO is. But with all the things that he does on the defensive side of the ball, and Doc Rivers just talked about this, and it's probably part of the reason why he generally wants him to return to Philadelphia. Ben Simmons just does so much more else on the basketball court than shooting or scoring that, he's much more valuable than what his trade value obviously says at this point.
Let me paint another picture here, and then I'll ask you guys kind of a simple question that you guys can figure it out. Ben Simmons, obviously a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, a 3-time All-Star, a very, very good player, someone who should warrant the type of trade value that Philly probably wants from him, but won't get based on recent production. Okay, they're not too far removed from being a bounce of the ball from going and meeting up with the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals and taking the place of the Raptors that then went on to win the NBA Finals. This team, everyone seems to be throwing around these rumors of, whoever would be entered into a Ben Simmons trade, the return in Philly would be a point guard. Okay, is that what Philly would need? Would they need a point guard, or would they need somebody to also make up? Is it just the shooting or offensive production, or what are you really missing by losing Ben Simmons on the defensive side of the ball? And then I guess that really kind of opens it up to, is Philly better off with or without Ben Simmons?
Yeah, you go ahead, Matt.
I mean, I'll say this. As far as defense, I think they'd have to add a few different players and try and figure that out collectively on how they're going to change their defensive setup to address the hole that Ben Simmons leaves. But, yeah, I think it is a point guard in the first place, because whenever this team has been best, it's when Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are surrounded by shooters that can facilitate, that allow Ben Simmons and Embiid to share to hold on to the ball, and then they can facilitate as they need to. I think if you wanted to really optimize Joel Embiid, you need a point guard that can get him the ball and allow Embiid to work as a true center, which is what he's great at and why he's compared to Hakeem Olajuwon. And so that, above all else, is the most important thing. However, that point guard tends to usually be able to have an outside shot and be respected in that sense. The issue is that if you don't have shooters around Simmons and Embiid, they can't work out together on the court together, because then you know that at least one guy is not going to be shooting the ball, and you can really focus in on Embiid and man mark the other shooters out on the court.
Mike, I think that was a really good question, because I think that a point guard you would think has to be the missing piece, but I think what we're going to see as this season begins and progresses is that the Philadelphia 76ers are just going to be worse than they were last year if Ben Simmons ends up leaving. They're not going to be able to fill the void defensively, that he's going to leave. As good as Matisse Thybulle is, as much as I think of him as a defender and as a young player in this league, as I just mentioned, what Ben Simmons brings to the defensive side of the ball as a top 2 defensive player of the year candidate is going to be missed, period. And even, the example that I brought in with the trade, involving Houston as a third party, you plug John Wall into that Sixers team in place of Ben Simmons. Do you guys think the Sixers are better in that situation? Because I personally don't. No. And that's just how it is. I think that this is just a bad situation overall for the Philadelphia 76ers. And ideally, you're able to just mend that relationship with Ben Simmons. You hope Ben and Joel Embiid are able to know what they have to do in terms of how they need to play together on the court to be successful. Know that there's going to have to be some give and take on, any given possession between either of them. And that's how they're going to be most successful. But when Ben Simmons inevitably leaves Philadelphia, I think they'll be worse off for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got a lose-lose situation in Philly because clearly they're at a point where they can't get over the hump. And no matter how many additional pieces you try to add in there, they're at a point where they're strapped for cash. They can't add in any more additional pieces. They would have to add by subtraction, addition by subtraction, which you can't do in this situation and replace a Ben Simmons defensively, make up for it offensively, and have that work out right, especially in the Eastern Conference where we've seen the Bucks assemble a big three. I mean, you still got the Lakers who weren't able to make any noise in the postseason, who are going to come back completely reloaded. So even if you do make it out of the East, you still have to deal with the vaunted West. Guys,
and I wanted to just add this quickly too. We just saw Michael Porter Jr., who's in his third year in the league, just signed a contract extension for nearly $200 million. Now, I love Michael Porter Jr. He is a sniper. I think he's going to be a future dang near all NBA player in this league, but he can't hold a candle to Ben Simmons defensively. And that's been the biggest knock on Michael Porter Jr. is that he not only does he not really try defensively, but he doesn't necessarily even have the tools to even defend at a starting level. And that's part of the reason why he doesn't play as many minutes as his offensive arsenal suggests, is because you can't really trust him defensively, especially in the postseason. So I know Ben Simmons is looking at that man who's around the same age, who he's an infinitely better defender than, getting $200 million contract extension. So I know they can't sit well with Ben Simmons. And I know he's probably thinking, watch this, I'm going to go somewhere where my team actually appreciates me, or I don't have to, play second fiddle or, play off of somebody like Joel Embiid. And I think he'll be better off for it. And as I mentioned earlier, this is just a lose-lose for Philadelphia.
Well, I think it's a lose-lose for Ben Simmons too, in the sense that he's not going
to remain to be seen.
He's not going to a contender. What you just talked about the Timberwolves as the best fit, and the Timberwolves have made the playoffs once in the last 20 years.
True.
And they're right now their front office is once again just abysmal. There's been questions around their coach. The guy that hired their coach questionably last year just got fired himself. They're getting new ownership in.
These are facts, Matt. These are facts, but I don't think if Ben Simmons goes to a team like Minnesota, or if he goes to a team that doesn't have title aspirations or even, deep postseason aspirations, I don't think that's a failure for him. I think what's more important to Ben Simmons right now is going somewhere where he can prove that he can still play basketball at a high level, that he's still that 3-time All-Star, All-NBA defensive team player. I think that's what's more important. If he's able to do that, even on a losing team, that's a success for him.
Real quick, situation like that, do you think Ben Simmons is capable of hanging 20 a night?
If he's the focal point of the offense, yeah.
I do.
But to your point, Scott, you just said, he has to play off of Embiid. He has to accept, what does he actually want out of his career? And what was his whole goal in the 76ers? Was it to run the 76ers? Because if so, he didn't show it in an attitude way. He played off of Embiid, and then he started to act like it, and then he got mad about it. If you want to be the guy, you dunk that ball. You don't pass it off in the playoffs. And to that point, say what you will about Michael Porter, and you're absolutely right. He has issues on defense. The dude averaged 17 points in the playoffs this season.
Love MPJ.
He makes that shot. Ben Simmons needs to just decide what he actually wants. If he wants to win a title, he's got to suck it up and go back to the 76ers and make a go of this.
Matt, you alluded to a great movie line from Anger Management, coincidentally about a point guard for the Philadelphia 76ers. When they're in the circle, guys listening to the radio broadcast, and Allen Iverson apparently doesn't go up for it. You got to dunk that stuff. You got to go for it. There, you use a different word, but you get the point. But anyways, we'll have to see how things shake out in the city of brotherly love. Doc Rivers has a interesting situation on his hands with a very talented roster, but we'll just have to see what the Sixers end up doing with Ben Simmons, and whether or not he decides to play in Philly is yet to be seen. And we'll just have to figure out how it all goes as the NBA regular season is not too far off into the future. So we will conclude things there. For Scott Procter and Matt Morris, I'm Mike Cianciolo, and we will catch you again soon on Chalk Talk.